The man never expected that the underdog he thought he could easily crush, someone who couldn't even use magic, had been hiding his true strength all along. What everyone saw as a declining swordsmanship talent in his hands was flawless. His sword could not only cut through magic, but could also effortlessly dispel the supreme spells created by the continent's top-ranked archmages. This completely shattered everyone's understanding. Normally, the protagonist never showed such power. In this magic-dominated world, being unable to use magic meant constant discrimination. Not just from classmates, but even teachers looked down on him. During magic class, the teacher often called on him to perform spells, but since he couldn't even cast a basic fireball, he never met expectations. The red-haired class bully, acting as the school's assassin, helped him complete the assignment, igniting the materials on the desk, but it felt more like humiliation than help. The teacher didn't reprimand the bully. Instead, he used it as another chance to put the protagonist down. Magic was everything here, the ultimate authority, and having knowledge, but no magical ability made the protagonist unworthy of being at the Magic Academy. The implication was clear. He should just drop out. After class, the redhead still wanted to make things worse, calling to others to block the protagonist. But a girl named Crete stepped in, stopping the bully and telling him not to insult the protagonist. No one understood how hard the protagonist worked better than she did. Most importantly, he was kind. Her defense made the bully lose his mood. The bully scoffed. Kindness and effort meant nothing if you couldn't become a great mage, let alone an archmage. With that, he swaggered off. The protagonist didn't care about the bully's words. Instead, he muttered to himself, "Today's a beautiful day." That caught Crete's attention, who thought it was thanks to the archmage's blessings. Maybe someone at the tower's top was watching them. Long ago, humans were trapped in darkness, threatened by alien invaders. 5 powerful mages, the archmages, stood up, drove out the invaders, and sealed the sky, bringing peace to the world. Since then, the title of archmage became the highest honor for mages. Crete wondered if the legendary ice staff was watching them from the tower top today. The protagonist was sure it was. No one knew they had once been childhood friends. They had promised to become archmages together and see the real sky from the tower's peak. But time passed, and the protagonist broke that promise. Unlike him, who had no magic talent, the other's magic was extraordinary. He became the youngest archmage ever. The protagonist didn't know if his friends still remembered him, but he still hoped that one day he'd stand by his side, so whenever he had free time, he'd explore the dungeon. Now he could reach the 7th floor. He didn't just want to grow stronger, he needed the credits. That's why, despite no magic, he was still allowed to stay at the academy. His mentor often told him to quit. The dungeon was dangerous, and one day he'd pay the price. Trying to use those credits to get into the upper academy was a pipe dream. To graduate, you needed credits in academics, practical magic, and internships, but since he couldn't use magic, he could never get practical magic credits. Even becoming an archmage was unlikely. This exam, he was 4 credits short. If he didn't make up the difference in 2 days, he'd be forced to quit. Panic struck him. As he looked up possible 4-credit monsters in the dungeon, his mentor muttered, "They say Baskerville has appeared on the 6th floor." Protagonist. He knew it was a hint. What he didn't know was that the redhead overheard. The bully decided to kill Baskerville first to remove the academy's weakling. He brought 2 followers for backup. The 6th floor was a bit much for him, and though the followers worried, his confidence reassured them. The bully sneered, "I'm here, you just need to help with support." The 2 followed without complaint. Not long after, 1 follower got knocked away. The attacker was a Hell Spirit Sentinel. Hearing screams nearby, the protagonist rushed over. He saw the redhead fighting a monster, but couldn't believe his eyes. It wasn't Baskerville. It was the Hell Spirit Sentinel, meant to dwell on a lower floor, worth 10 credits. Had there been a floor accident, the redhead was clearly outmatched and had no chance to break through the monster's defense. If it were anyone else, the protagonist would have jumped in to help immediately. But since it was the bully who'd been tormenting him, he hesitated. Suddenly, a voice appeared in his mind. Maddie remembers tomorrow is August 30th. Everyone's got something special. The words from his childhood friend. He realized those words weren't just personality. They reflected his desire to stand by his friend and be worthy of him. That's why he'd become this way. With that thought, he stopped hesitating and moved forward. Meanwhile, Teacher Edouard angrily asked Vakna if he knew the redhead had sneaked into the dungeon. Vakna wanted to send a familiar to search, but when he heard the redhead was on the 6th floor, he said it wasn't necessary. Using a crystal ball, he revealed the 6th floor scene. Edouard saw a shocking sight. Not just the Hell Spirit Sentinel on the 6th floor, but also the protagonist's strength. A magicless underdog fighting the Hell Spirit Sentinel, even gaining the upper hand. Edouard couldn't believe it. Vakna calmly explained the protagonist was an outlier, possessing dwarf-like toughness no mage had, and, most importantly, an insight ability that let him master enemy moves after seeing them once. Although the protagonist couldn't use magic, he was the only true warrior in this world, and his battle was the only real climax. Facing the sudden berserk Hell Spirit Sentinel, the protagonist calmly performed a flawless 3-step sword draw technique. The proud mage, Vakna, laughed aloud but was watched closely by Edouard, who couldn't believe it. Someone without magic was actually stronger than magic itself. Unable to accept this reality, Edouard angrily left. The next morning, under Vecna's watchful eye, the protagonist had to honestly explain everything. To his surprise, Vecna wasn't angry. Instead, he awarded the protagonist the lost credits for defeating the Hell Spirit Sentinel. With that, the protagonist no longer had to worry about being expelled. What the protagonist didn't know was that all his actions had been observed by the staff of soldiers, which was eagerly awaiting the day to meet him. No one expected that in this magic-dominated world, a person could use unconventional swordsmanship to cut through powerful magical attacks. Not only that, but even the mage's proud defensive barrier shattered like tofu. This shattered their long-held beliefs. How could swordsmanship, looked down upon, surpass magic? This scene made Edouard regret how he had treated the protagonist before, simply because he couldn't use magic. Edouard wanted the protagonist to quit, but the principal refused to expel him. Despite his inability to use magic, the protagonist had other talents, especially swordsmanship, which was among the best. Unbeknownst to many, the principal had once tested the protagonist. He wondered how someone without magic could fight magic users. The protagonist's performance shocked him. At a critical moment, he cut through a magic spell with one sword strike and still had energy to spare. His movements were smooth and fluid, easily passing the test. After witnessing this, the principal greatly admired not only the protagonist's swordsmanship, but also his character. Despite being seen as a useless magicless student, he dreamed of becoming the highest-ranking warrior mage. The principal eagerly anticipated his future. This was why the protagonist could remain at the Magic Academy despite his lack of magic. Not wanting to reveal this to Edouard, the principal saw the protagonist's determination and decided to let Edouard personally test him, setting the challenge himself. If the protagonist failed, then expulsion would be final. Edouard was pleased, though he knew the protagonist's sword skills were amazing. From the moment the principal agreed, he was sure the protagonist would be expelled. Edouard was the closest person to becoming the supreme warrior mage. Soon, Edouard called the protagonist to the training ground under the pretext of disliking his poor performance in magic classes. Since the protagonist couldn't use magic, he naturally had no credits in that area. Edouard would now personally tutor him one-on-one. The challenge: hit Edouard once, and the protagonist passes, fail, and he must leave the school. Hearing this, the protagonist realized Edouard's true intent: to force him out. At the same time, Vecna was summoned to the principal's office. As someone who knew the protagonist well, he was informed of the situation. Though Vecna initially didn't understand, once he saw the images on the water mirror, he knew something was wrong. The principal forbade him from intervening but wanted Edouard to have a chance. The test results would decide if the protagonist was worthy of the title Supreme Warrior Mage. Vecna grew angry. Although he respected Edouard, the closest to the Supreme Warrior Mage, even if defeated, was still a legend. At the school, the protagonist was like an outer disciple. Even if lucky enough to enter the upper academy, he'd be just an inner disciple. The title Supreme Warrior Mage represented the highest level of magic society. Being the closest to it meant the protagonist had almost no chance of passing. Meanwhile, the protagonist experienced Edouard's terrifying power firsthand. Even Edouard's basic beginner spells were as strong as advanced magic from ordinary mages. The protagonist tried to attack but couldn't break Edouard's defensive barrier despite his physical skill. He regretted not giving up earlier. Edouard had no intention of bullying him with overwhelming magic. He only used two types of magic for offense and defense. But he did not forbid using multiple spells simultaneously. In an instant, the protagonist was overwhelmed by a relentless barrage of magical arrows. A devastating rain of arrows attack. Though the protagonist tried to dodge, the narrow space made evasion impossible. For Edouard, this was an enjoyable spectacle. Soon the protagonist could no longer hold on, but he was determined. Though he knew Edouard's power was terrifying, at least he had a chance to face him. Meanwhile, Crete noticed that the magic companion who always stayed by the protagonist looked different. She realized the protagonist was in danger and might need a sword. Just as she prepared to open a cabinet, Edouard paused his attack. Seeing the protagonist's grim state, Edouard thought of something interesting. He asked if the protagonist had heard of the Battle of Gassa, when the foolish dwarves rebelled with 10,000 troops. How many mages were needed to suppress them? The answer: only one. With a single staff, one mage defeated 10,000 warriors who relied on brute strength. This was the truth of the world. Magic was untouchable. If the protagonist couldn't surpass Edouard the gatekeeper, how could he ever become a supreme warrior mage? Edouard told the protagonist to give up his unrealistic dream. Suddenly, a power surged from beneath. The protagonist still wanted to become the supreme warrior mage. Edouard didn't understand why the protagonist fought so hard, but when he learned it was to be with someone he loved, he was stunned. He angrily scolded him. Becoming the supreme warrior mage was no child's game. Just as Edouard prepared to crush the protagonist's hope, the protagonist put on the goggles his childhood friend had given him, the source of his strength. This enraged Edouard, a heretic who wielded a sword instead of a staff, was ridiculous. But when Edouard attacked with magic, the protagonist, sword in hand, was no longer afraid. He easily cut through the magic. This amazed Edouard. Never had he heard of anyone cutting magic with a sword. That was just a casual strike. But it was enough for Edouard to escalate. He unleashed the Drain of Arrows attack again, an unrelenting assault with no blind spots. Though the protagonist had never faced such a scene before, his sword gave him great confidence. Even against Edouard, the closest to Supreme Warrior Mage, he was determined to break through. This battle was like the Battle of Gaza's aftermath. Although the dwarves were crushed by one staff, their general struck a last powerful blow that severely wounded the mage. The mage admired his courage and acknowledged his status. Magic wasn't an untouchable existence. This fact, small to Edouard, was etched deep in his mind. Meanwhile, the girl the protagonist saved never expected that she, surrounded by monsters and doomed to die, would be rescued by a magicless muggle. His swordsmanship was unmatched, striking 3 times so fast even the naked eye couldn't follow. This shattered her previous beliefs. In a magic world, only magic mattered, and everything else was just flashy tricks. But the protagonist didn't know what she thought. He hadn't expected to save someone so important so deep in the 4th underground level. The girl was no harmless victim but was disguising herself and had a remarkable background, qualified to become a Supreme Warrior Mage and climb the tower's peak at will. The protagonist was unaware. He had recently learned that the Staff of Soldiers was now the 12th strongest magic creation in history. Because this creation demanded many troops from the 4th underground level, the protagonist decided to help defeat them, not just for the rewards, but because he wanted to repay a promise. He never forgot the words before parting. "I'll wait for you at the tower's peak." In this world where magic was supreme, he believed that someday he could become a Supreme Warrior Mage and stand beside his friend with the red sword. Though he knew this was almost impossible, at least now he could help. Soon he arrived at the 4th underground level, but was surprised by the Staff of Soldiers' popularity. Within a short time, students filled the outer area, making it impossible for him to hunt the monsters. So he decided to go deeper. Unexpectedly, he met a 4th-year student in the depths. After defeating the monsters swiftly, they began traveling together. Alice, the girl he saved, was amazed by his swordsmanship. She had never seen anyone train it to such a level. Though she kept her emotions hidden, she thanked him sincerely for saving her. When the protagonist asked why he came to such a dangerous place, he said he wanted to become one of those who support the sky. This resonated with the protagonist. It turned out that, long ago, to defend against invaders from beyond the sky, the original Supreme Five used their ultimate power to create a barrier that kept enemies out. But as a cost, later generations could no longer see the real sky. What's visible now is just an illusion created by the barrier. Because of this, he told his childhood friend that they wanted to see the true sunset someday, hoping that one day they could tear apart this fake sky. Of course, before that, they had to gain the strength of the Supreme Five and the ability to defend against those sky invaders. While the protagonist was thinking this, Alice mentioned that 7 of his roommates had actually seen the ice muscle staff. He could never forget the time when, surrounded by monsters, the wielder saved him with just one strike, suddenly silencing the whole scene. That moment left a deep impression on him. He came to explore the depths, hoping to help the ice muscle staff. But unfortunately, even in such a sparsely populated place, he couldn't find the twin infantry, and his magic judgment was useless. Just as he said that, the protagonist discovered from the tracks left behind that there was indeed a twin infantry nearby, but this one was different. He sensed it was a tough opponent because the ice shards left behind were several times larger than normal. His intuition told him the monster was not far ahead. Alice was puzzled. He couldn't understand how a protagonist who couldn't use magic could be so confidently sure about this. The protagonist simply said that magic isn't everything, especially in dungeons. Even without magic, he could use knowledge, wisdom, and experience to make up for it. When the beggar saw the monster's true form, Alice was shocked. He instantly recognized it as a special species from the 4th floor. The Twin King worth 6 credit points. For context, the Baskerville from the 6th floor is only worth 4 points. Both are monsters ordinary students can't handle. What Alice didn't know was that the protagonist had already defeated an evil spirit sentinel worth several credit points before. Learning that the protagonist would personally take on this monster worried him. The Twin King's physical attacks barely affect it. In fact, anyone who touches it is instantly fronts in. In short, it's a nightmare for close combat fighters and usually only fire magic, which counters it, is effective. Alice kindly warned the protagonist, but he said it was no problem. He had already defeated many Twin Kings and had plenty of experience handling them. The next moment, just as he said, he quickly closed the distance and dodged the Twin King's laser attack without a scratch. Calmly, he threw a strange device that latched onto the Twin King's body, then began circling it wildly. Moving up and down, left and right, he probed the edge between life and death, but not randomly. Using thin threads from the device, he tied the Twin King tightly. This special magical tool not only resists the enemy's body movements, but also carries its own fire magic. After mastering the timing, he unleashed his final attack. Fire suddenly traveled along the threads at incredible speed and reached the target, essentially. His device worked like setting off a firecracker, causing a powerful explosion that brought the Twin King down. As expected, the Twin King collapsed on the spot, but while the protagonist was retrieving the device, he didn't notice Alice's suddenly strange expression. After parting ways with the protagonist, Alice changed completely. He was actually a member of a talent scouting agency few knew about in the magic world. After dropping his naive disguise, he went to the Tower Summit, the usual meeting place of the Supreme Five. Coincidentally, they had just finished a meeting. Facing the overwhelming presence, Alice stayed calm and said he had discovered an interesting talent during his academy inspection, a powerless person who couldn't use magic. He wanted to recommend this person to join the summit. This statement sparked strong reactions. The top 3 students of the academy were furious, believing someone who couldn't use magic didn't deserve to be there. One of them, who had always looked down on the protagonist as a useless last-place student, was enraged. He never expected the powerless protagonist to stand up today, bullying his 2 followers and openly mocking him, calling him less than an animal. This completely infuriated the top student. Instantly, the whole tavern transformed into an icy world under his influence, but the protagonist remained calm and stood firm under the ice magic's shame. When the top student tried to freeze the protagonist solid, the protagonist's cold gaze unsettled him, making him change his mind. He threatened the protagonist, forcing him to join the upcoming Magic Island competition, claiming that only by humiliating him publicly could he make him give up, but he had no idea he was messing with the wrong person. Though the protagonist couldn't use magic, his swordsmanship had reached a true mastery level, surpassing everyone in the academy. He had never planned to participate in the Magic Island Grand Prix, a competition held every 2 years that scouts talents for the Supreme Five. When he was in the 2nd year, he was ridiculed for being powerless, which left a deep psychological scar. But recently, after telling his friend Clet encouraged him to try again since this competition determined if he could advance to a higher academy. Normally, the school requires 12,000 credit points to graduate, with a passing line of 7,200 points. To enter the upper academy, a student must reach this passing line, and only the top 3 students can score 10,000 or more to get direct admission. For example, a previous opponent, Hongmao, had 9,800 points, although the protagonist scored full marks academically. His lack of magic meant he couldn't reach 7,200 points and therefore couldn't advance. However, excelling in the Magic Island competition could catch the Supreme Five's attention, possibly leading to an exceptional appointment to the tower. Rumor also says the mysterious talent agency will send representatives to recruit outstanding players. No matter which way, it seemed unrealistic for the protagonist, since he believed only by using magic beyond advanced magic research would he be noticed. On top of that, he still had to work a part-time job at night. Because he didn't qualify for a scholarship, he couldn't afford tuition without working. Though the boss was nice and spoke kindly, the dwarf employees at the shop were always noisy. Still, the protagonist enjoyed the job and felt comfortable there. Over time, he became close with the customers, even though dwarves and barbarians were looked down upon by society. Their outsider status resonated with his own as a powerless person. This time, he called in a friend to help, someone like Clet who had always cared for him, but just then an unexpected guest showed up at the shop. After they entered the shop, the atmosphere suddenly fell silent, so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. The reason was obvious. It was because of who had arrived. It was the blue-haired student. One of them angered some of the dwarves. Long ago, their world was destroyed by invaders from the sky, forcing them to flee here. Unlike elves, dwarves were looked down upon by society. If they offended any mage, their position could become precarious. This was part of why the blue-haired student was so brazen, but mainly it was because of his own strength. In this magic-dominated world, being in the top 3 gave him immense confidence. The protagonist ignored the initial insults. He'd heard far worse over the years, but after the food was served, the blue-haired student and his friends began mocking the dishes, saying even excrement would be better, claiming the food smelled like dwarf sweat. This was the last straw for the protagonist. He wasn't a dwarf and didn't share their fears or restraints. He stepped up to confront them, telling them to retract their insult about the smell. Because the dwarves' craft was a product of their wisdom and their sweat a testament to hard work in harsh environments, not something to mock. Rather than backing down, the blue-haired student grew even more arrogant and kicked the protagonist's clothes. The 2 companions also lost patience, insulting the protagonist further, though the protagonist's calm defiance surprised the blue-haired student. This was the moment he truly snapped and taunted him with an icy flower. Just as he prepared to freeze the protagonist solid, something inside made him hesitate and shift tactics. No one could have imagined that the boy who had been laughed at all school, long for being powerless, would become a sensation at the Magic Island competition. Despite his inability to use magic, he swept the competition using only his body and swordsmanship, leaving even the top 3 teams far behind. This shattered everyone's expectations. In previous practical combat classes, the protagonist scored 0 because only magic was allowed, giving him no chance. This made the audience laugh, recalling that he had never been able to overcome a single golem in practical classes. What they didn't realize was that this time he used magic weapons created from earth magic, combined with his swordsmanship and strong physique, allowing him to defeat golems with single strikes. Everyone was speechless, unable to recognize this as the same powerless student. After passing the stone formation first, the protagonist and his team entered the rocky desert area, where the protagonist had yet to reveal his full power and realized he needed to pick up the pace. Next came the forest area, full of special traps designed by Edwo, the Academy's trapmaster. Though challenging, the protagonist breezed through with no trouble, but instead of relief, he felt uneasy, sensing he would soon encounter the blue-haired student here. The forest was a mandatory passage for all teams, so rather than wait passively, the protagonist decided to set an ambush. Just then, he noticed the blue-haired student had arrived even earlier, surprising Colette, who hadn't stopped moving since the competition began. Without wasting words, the blue-haired student launched a rapid magical assault. The protagonist was unfazed, dodging effortlessly. What surprised the blue-haired student more was seeing the red-haired teammate apparently preparing a powerful attack. Despite this, the blue-haired student remained confident, suspecting his opponent had other plans. At that moment, Colette realized what was going on. She had thought Redhair was there to help the protagonist, but now it was clear Redhair intended to take out both the protagonist and Bluehair in one sweep. The protagonist was still dazed as he looked around. His surroundings had turned into a sea of flames, and Bluehair was nowhere to be seen. He knew then that Redhair planned to kill him too. Neither Colette nor the protagonist understood Redhair's true intentions. They were supposed to be teammates. The protagonist never expected that the kid who was always last in school rankings and couldn't use magic would suddenly leap into the air and jump thousands of meters. Just before the championship was decided, he finally revealed his true power, landing like a shooting star. Everyone was stunned, especially Redhair, who had planned to teach the protagonist a lesson. Redhair had always been arrogant, but now the crowd was shocked. Weren't these supposed to be teammates? The talent scouts watching had hoped Redhair's strong performance might earn him a direct spot in the tower, but seeing teammates fight each other caused their opinion of him to plummet. The protagonist wasn't arrogant, he just wanted to catch up to his childhood friend and become the ultimate warrior, because he couldn't use magic. He'd always been treated differently. Redhair had his own secret pain, but the protagonist ignored his goodwill and treated him like a joke. Frustrated and embarrassed, Redhair became one of those who bullied him. However, after witnessing the protagonist's hidden terrifying strength, Redhair felt betrayed. Someone so powerful pretending to be weak and ignoring him completely, it was like being made a clown. Old grudges and new conflicts erupted, leading to the current situation. The protagonist didn't want to fight his teammates, but soon realized Redhair's attacks were deadly. Redhair seemed to have made a breakthrough in his mastery of flame magic. Usually, cutting off a Firebird Guardian's wings would stop it, and the protagonist planned to seize that chance. But the Firebird healed incredibly fast. Without hitting a critical weak spot, any effort was useless. This shocked not only the protagonist but also the audience and Redhair's teacher, Edworth. Edworth didn't know when Redhair had improved so much. The high-level flame magic that burned the entire forest far exceeded student level, causing the talent scouts to eat their words and prepare to report this back to their superiors. Facing Redhair's lethal intent, the protagonist finally decided to fight seriously. Redhair unleashed the Firebird again, along with a wide-area annihilation spell, making the battle extremely difficult. Just as the fight heated up, it was suddenly interrupted. Looking up, the newcomer was Krek. He had just fought Bluehair, and Bluehair's clones were appearing all over the arena, causing chaos. Bluehair's clones could defend themselves, and the protagonist, caught off guard, was Francine Solid. Some supervisors recognized Bluehair's magic. It was one of the 12 white arts created by the Ice Staff, one of the Supreme 5 arts. This magic can create weapon clones resembling the user that automatically attack by will. Bluehair had already reached the Supreme 5 arts level. At first, the guy was only surprised to hear that he had mastered this technique through self-study, but then, unexpectedly, he suddenly began mocking the Ice Staff's magic, saying it wasn't that impressive and that he could borrow from everything he had. Hearing this instantly broke the protagonist's composure. The thing he could never stand was someone insulting his childhood friend. However, after taking just a few steps, he realized that several clones of the blue-haired guy had already silently surrounded him. So, he had no choice but to deal with the immediate threat. But little did he know, this was just an appetizer from the blue-haired guy. The real reason the clones surrounded the protagonist was to launch a secret technique, one that started from the clones and broke through the ice prison. Seeing that the protagonist couldn't win, no matter how hard he fought, the blue-haired guy laughed. The next moment, he unleashed his trump card. When everyone looked up, they saw a huge ice spike had appeared in the sky. Following his command, the spike came crashing down, and the protagonist had no chance to dodge. Witnessing this, everyone realized just how terrifying the blue-haired guy was. Even Edward couldn't help but praise him, saying that winning without moving a step, that's a true talent in the magic world. As he said, it had all been the blue-haired guy's clones performing, while his real body hadn't moved at all. Seeing that victory was assured, the blue-haired guy confidently began promoting himself, claiming that with his current strength, he deserved to be the ice staff's successor. This statement immediately drew cheers from the crowd. If the blue-haired guy wasn't suitable, then no one was, but some disagreed, mocking him for only using sneaky tricks and that even Mao Ze would want to leave him. Unexpectedly, the protagonist's first words as he stepped out were a thank you to the blue-haired guy. It was that very magic that had calmed him down, because whenever something related to the ice staff came up, he would get overly emotional. But the blue-haired guy didn't want to listen to his nonsense and immediately attacked again, using control magic to drain the protagonist. What he didn't know was that the protagonist was now completely different from before. In an instant, he appeared behind the blue-haired guy's two followers and with one strike forced them to retreat. But this wasn't just about dealing with the minions. He had discovered a weakness in the blue-haired guy's technique. When the two followers fell, something strange happened. The blue-haired guy's clones all shattered. As the audience wondered why, the protagonist revealed the truth. The blue-haired guy's self-taught white magic was imperfect. His clones had no independent will and needed assistance from companions to control them. The technique was a shortcut, barely mastered, yet he had arrogantly dismissed other magic as nothing special. As the blue-haired guy grew angry, high above at the tower's base, the ice staff's deputy received information about him and reported that the blue-haired guy's performance might make him the successor. But the ice staff seemed indifferent, saying that was only if the record was true, yet the deputy was sure the blue-haired guy was the only choice. Meanwhile, the battle between the two flared up again. From the moment the protagonist regained his calm, the tide no longer turned. The blue-haired guy foolishly believed he still had a chance. Though he lost his companions, help and his clones became fixed projectiles. Clones were still clones. As long as the protagonist couldn't tell which was the real one, he could still turn the tide. But just as he thought this, the protagonist immediately spotted the real body. Even though the blue-haired guy tried to resist with ice terrain, his fragile ice body shattered, sending waves of pain. What troubled him more was how the protagonist discovered his real form. The protagonist revealed the secret. The blue-haired guy's clones had one. Flaw, they were about -36 and emitted cold that caused ice flakes to form at their feet. A master wouldn't have this problem, but he did. This revelation broke the blue-haired guy's composure. When he couldn't understand how the protagonist knew so much, the protagonist didn't hide it. He explained that since he and the ice staff were orphans who grew up in the same orphanage, he knew both the strengths and weaknesses of the blue-haired guy's magic. This meant the blue-haired guy had been defeated from the start. Hearing this, the blue-haired guy was embarrassed. It showed that his pride in mastering this magic was just clownish, like a little girl. This realization drove him insane. After a burst of laughter, he unleashed his final ace. 8 clones appeared on the battlefield. This was the limit of his current power. But the blue-haired guy no longer had his previous arrogance. He fled like a mouse. At first, he tried to struggle, but no matter how fast or dense the attacks were, he couldn't stop the protagonist's advance. The distance kept closing. Alone with just a sword, the protagonist crushed all his hopes. In the final moment, he stopped using the sword and finished it with a punch. The battle ended, and the crowd erupted in cheers. A loser with no magic had beaten an elite with over 10,000 credits. This was something unimaginable before. All that was left was to take the crown and claim victory. But just as the judge announced the result, someone else jumped ahead. The green-haired guy, also one of the top 3 students, appeared unexpectedly. The audience didn't notice him before, and though it was surprising, by the rules the crown rightfully belonged to the green-haired team. Though the protagonist felt a bit disappointed, he wasn't too bothered. After beating the blue-haired guy, his original goal in the tournament was achieved. Unbeknownst to him, at the tower's peak, the ice staff was asking his deputy if there was a magic to erase memories. During the fight with the blue-haired guy, the protagonist had revealed he was bullied by the ice staff in the past. The deputy didn't hesitate to answer yes, confirming the blue-haired guy was the ice staff's only candidate for succession. What shocked the protagonist even more was that his roommate for years was actually his childhood friend created by magic, always watching him to prevent him from flirting. This misunderstanding also made Colette think the protagonist's rival was a man. Recently, after the Magic Island event, the protagonist's impressive performance reversed his standing at school, no longer looked down on as a loser. Everyone was now eager to have him join their teams for the upcoming comprehensive internship. This was the only chance to gain a large number of credits at once by hunting in the underground dungeon. But though many girls invited him, Colette got jealous and scolded them for being selfish. Her words didn't work, and most found her annoying. The day before, Colette had made up a story about going shopping with the protagonist. Though he didn't refuse, the news reached his roommate, who was on high alert. The outing looked like a date. The next day, after carefully dressing up, Colette arrived as planned, hoping for something sweet to happen. But then a third wheel appeared. Finding out it was the protagonist's roommate, Colette lost the chance to be alone with him but wasn't worried since he was a guy. However, the roommate suddenly got close to the protagonist, making Colette suspicious of his feelings toward the protagonist. She even wondered if they looked so good together that the roommate was hiding his feelings. Just then, the roommate returned with drinks, handing one to the protagonist and one to Colette. But when the protagonist wondered why he was fine while sending me flying, I want to be free, really messing with the man's bear, it confused him. It turned out that going to maintain the ship was one of his plans for today. However, since the dwarves have never liked the mages, he had to go alone. The protagonist didn't think much of it, unaware this was part of a silent agreement between two others. After the protagonist left, Cret took the lead and asked Ross if he had romantic feelings for the protagonist. But before the conversation could continue, chaos broke out. On the way to the maintenance room, the protagonist unexpectedly ran into Lyanna, the top student of the year. She said she had something to discuss, so he followed her to a grand house. The scene inside shocked him. As many people present had dealt with him before, the top 4 students were all here. The protagonist soon understood why Lyanna sought him out. It was about the combined internship. She wanted the 5 of them on site to form the strongest team to attack the dungeon together. Whether the protagonist agreed or not, it was unclear why red hair and blue hair came along. Just keeping them from fighting was already a blessing. The protagonist's thoughts were similar. When he assumed Lyanna had some strategy, the unlucky one was asked if she could open the door. No welcoming music played. The goal was unclear. Then it was mentioned this could help ghosts come to Lisa. At this, red hair gave up on fighting. This scene was no illusion but a magical illusion unique to the elf clan. At the tense moment, Lyanna suddenly said the protagonist had all their qualities and was already useful in the dungeon. Blue Cat mocked him, saying someone who can't even use detection magic was useless and a burden. Red hair bluntly said he didn't want to bet on the protagonist again. Surprisingly, green hair spoke up for the protagonist, saying they were like eyes to the bereaved. How could there be anyone they couldn't defeat? Thus, the protagonist was qualified to join their team based on his magical ability. More importantly, he trusted Lyanna's judgment. But the protagonist was puzzled. After the grand magical plan ended, talents like Lyanna should have been noticed by the tower's recruiters. So why put so much emphasis on a simple combined internship? Lyanna's expression didn't change, but she confirmed that the tower had contacted her. She said this internship could only elevate one's status slightly, but everyone present, including herself, had ambitions to become top-ranked warriors. The atmosphere suddenly became quiet. Lyanna then asked everyone to place their coins into a container. Once placed, it meant agreement. As expected, red hair and blue hair stopped bickering, since their grudges with the protagonist were trivial compared to the highest warrior's authority. The protagonist was among them. Time flew, and the combined internship day arrived. No special rules, students had to survive a week in the dungeon. One thing the teacher emphasized repeatedly was don't take risks, because every year, someone died. Teachers were stationed on every floor to assist. If someone couldn't hold on, they could retreat there. While the teacher was explaining precautions, danger silently approached. Sure enough, the protagonist never expected the internship to go so wrong. They only needed to hunt monsters within the first 10 floors. But a mysterious monster far exceeding that appeared, even more unbelievable. A single strike from this monster pierced through the floor of the 10th level. Before they realized it, they were sent to the 11th level. Though just 1 floor difference, it felt like entering hell for them, because floors beyond 11 are the tower's inner area, deadly even for advanced mages and not meant for students. Unexpectedly, the protector who appeared was the team's weakest member who couldn't use magic. The internship had just officially started. As expected, the newly formed strongest team led the way, thanks to green hair's wind magic. They outran everyone and first encountered the 7th floor monsters. As the only warrior in the team, the protagonist wanted to take the front line, but before he could move, Lyanna stepped forward. Unlike typical mages, she was also an expert in melee combat and didn't need frontline protection. The others followed her lead. Green hair explained that the top 4 students found 7th floor monsters no challenge. They could kill them with 1 hit. This made green hair doubt Lyanna's judgment. The protagonist couldn't even act as a shield. But Lyanna explained that was because the monsters were too weak. When they met strong enemies, the protagonist would be needed. This surprised the protagonist. He and Lyanna had barely talked, but she trusted him so much. Meanwhile, blue hair and red hair kept mocking him for lacking detection magic and told him not to get in the way. Despite this, the protagonist accepted his position because he had no way to sense magic, so teammates usually got the jump on him. By the end of the day, he hadn't killed a single monster. To rest and prepare, the team looked for a safe spot, unexpectedly before anyone else. The protagonist created a flame fortress, a magical illusion of the elf clan. The magic was only an illusion, but warned monsters not to approach carelessly. Lyanna then told the protagonist to distribute the team's rations, which he hadn't expected. After he did, Familiar faces showed cold attitudes. Even Greenhair was less friendly, telling him to just place the rations on the ground without getting close. The reason elves never touch what they don't approve of. He also said that in this team, he only respected Lyanna. Though Kret was annoyed, the protagonist endured because this was the pride of the elf race. Although dwarves and elves were both immigrants, elves were highly respected in the magical world. The elf princess was even one of the current 5 top artisans. During rest, Lyanna shared her plan. Their target was a rare and valuable 110 level floor gatekeeper. Killing this hardest boss would boost their reputation in the tower, so they planned to first defeat the gatekeeper and worry about other monsters later. No one objected, but what Lyanna didn't know was that somewhere in the dungeon, someone else was aware of the increasing monster deaths, including some teachers' deaths and a growing danger. When the team reached the terrain floor, they noticed an eerie silence despite many monster corpses. They saw the recently dead 4th floor gatekeeper. After detecting for clues, they found nothing. This puzzled them. The protagonist recalled the teacher's words. Detection magic is important but not absolute. If the enemy is a mage, they might use concealment magic. Some monsters can avoid detection. Suddenly, they heard noises above, exactly what the teacher warned about, monsters that can avoid detection. Before they could react, the monsters broke through the floor. The protagonist found himself on the 11th level, now only with green hair. The monster's attack had scattered their team. Though unfamiliar with the environment, they recognized the 11th floor, a place only advanced mages could enter. Meanwhile, chate spread throughout the dungeon, monsters were going berserk and teachers stationed on floors were dying. Greenhair woke suddenly and saw death around him. He realized they had to regroup quickly, because waiting would mean certain death, though weakened. Greenhair was ready to use detection magic again soon. The protagonist instructed Greenhair to use detection when he reached his magic limits. To conserve energy, nearby scouting was Greenhair's job. Longer range detection was the protagonist's. Just then, the protagonist noticed 3 monsters, worth 80 points each, appeared. He decided to let Greenhair handle the 2 in front and take the 1 behind himself. Though Greenhair wasn't at full strength, these small monsters were no problem. To his surprise, Greenhair and the protagonist finished at almost the same time. Greenhair was shocked by the protagonist's speed and agility in such a dangerous environment. When Greenhair tried to attack the monster behind the protagonist, he found it still alive. The protagonist explained why he couldn't use illusion magic to hide. The monster was an evil spirit dolphin with no eyes, relying on smell to detect prey, making illusions useless. He only knew this from books. With Greenhair's skill, a rematch against the evil spirit dolphin would be impossible. The protagonist originally just wanted to cheer up Greenhair, but unexpectedly overheard a hidden secret. The gentleman never imagined that the mysterious monster who nearly wiped out their entire team, worth 270 credits, was actually just a summoner working alone. Keep in mind, most monsters on the 11th floor are only worth a few Downson credits. Such a foe, from an entirely different dimension, had reappeared before them, pushing them to the brink of death. Not long ago, after learning Greenhair was also at the bottom of the rankings, the protagonist realized their situations were surprisingly similar. The protagonist's goal was to catch up to his childhood friend, the Ice Machine Barrier, while Greenhair aimed to catch up to the Yao Saint, one of the 5 supreme beings. It turned out the Yao Saint Barrier was actually from the same clan as Greenhair. They grew up together as kids and were very close. Because the Yao Saint was born earlier, he knew more magic than Greenhair. Greenhair had once tried to show off his magic in front of the Yao Saint, but the Yao Saint immediately understood and surpassed him by a huge margin. The Yao Saint's illusion magic could even create the king's forest, something even high elves couldn't do. After revealing this unmatched talent, the two parted like heaven and earth. Within a few years, the Yao Saint became a supreme being, while Greenhair remained the lowest-ranking elf. 6 years later, Greenhair still hadn't graduated from the Magic Academy. Everyone else from his cohort had already ascended the tower. The main reason was his illusion magic was flawed. It was supposed to turn illusions into reality, but no matter how hard he tried, Greenhair's magic only produced intangible phantoms, empty and ineffective, unable to cause real harm. Although being top 3 in school sounded impressive, it only meant he was a talent within the academy. At this age, true strength meant ascending the tower early. Thinking about this, Greenhair felt ridiculous. How could he, the lowest ranked, hope to catch the Yao Saint? Hearing Greenhair's story, the protagonist laughed, not out of mockery, but because they were brothers in hardship. Just as he was about to speak, strange sounds appeared. Greenhair immediately cast a detection spell, but nothing showed up. This had happened more than once before. The protagonist realized the dungeon was spawning monsters. The dungeon automatically refreshed its monsters over time. Though he understood this, he didn't expect such luck. The spawned monsters were special species from the 11th floor. Seeing this, the protagonist quickly destroyed the monster-producing device with magic, but it was too late. 3 monsters survived. Though only 3 remained, the protagonist was alarmed. he instantly recognized them as monsters worth 11 credits, stronger than the 10-credit evil spirit sentinels that had nearly killed Red Hair before. These monsters were immune to physical attacks and highly resistant to magic. Their only weakness was the elves' illusion magic. The protagonist placed his hopes on Green Hair, but Green Hair admitted he couldn't do it. His illusion magic was incomplete, as he had said earlier. The protagonist had expected this and replied that, like Green Hair, he also had unrealistic dreams to catch up to the Ice Machine battle. This shocked Green Hair, realizing he wasn't alone. Then the battle erupted. The protagonist's swordsmanship could only defend. It couldn't harm the fire monster immune to physical attacks. Putting himself in danger, Green Hair decided to try his illusion magic, determined to succeed, but it failed again, still intangible and ineffective. He worried the protagonist might be hurt because of him. But at the crucial moment, the protagonist not only blocked the fire monster's attack, but encouraged Green Hair. That belief broke Green Hair's defenses, though he was the elf clan's disgrace. Abandoned by his kin, the protagonist believed in him without hesitation. A surge of unwillingness rose in Green Hair's heart, and the image of the Yao Saint flashed through his mind. As their rift began to heal, the dungeon shifted again. Massive numbers of evil spirit sentinels appeared, attacking the red-blue duo first. Even on the 11th floor, Blue Cat found their numbers overwhelming, like they were multiplying. This reminded the protagonist of the mysterious monster on the 10th floor, whose single evil spirit sentinel almost killed Red Hair. Thanks to the protagonist's earlier efforts, Red Hair's magic had improved, and he was no longer afraid of the evil spirit sentinels. Meanwhile, similar incidents were occurring on every floor. A group of evil spirit sentinels even attacked the headquarters, and ordinary students stood no chance. At the critical moment, Edward appeared and instantly wiped out all the evil spirit sentinels with a single strike, proving his supreme 5-feet title was no joke. Then Wakna, their teacher, arrived and quickly took Edward away, rushing to the 11th floor. If not for the cat-type beast gifted to the protagonist earlier, moving would have been much harder. The protagonist arrived at the 11th floor and found the red-blue duo. Green Hair was stunned by what he saw and at first hated being touched, but eventually accepted the help. Both Red Hair's progress and Blue Hair's clones played big roles. Seeing them unharmed made the protagonist happy. But upon learning they hadn't encountered Lyanna and Kret, he felt a bad premonition. Sure enough, the protagonist's crowmouth was right. Both girls faced unprecedented danger. They never expected to meet their academy teachers on the 11th floor, but this wasn't a good thing. It was a bad one. Soon, they discovered the teachers' bodies were being used by others. Crate demanded to know who they were. The headless man simply said they were pure villains aiming to tear apart the false sky, the barrier set by the Supreme Warrior to fend off extraterrestrial invaders. Breaking it would be disastrous. The headless man refused to explain more and tried to use the two girls' heads for a swift, deadly slash. At the last second, the protagonist arrived, saving the girls and blocking the attack. The headless man, unfazed, suddenly revealed multiple heads, clearly excited. Just as he planned to collect them all, his partner pulled him away. Citing lack of time and the need to retrieve an object, they sensed even worse trouble was coming. The protagonist never expected that his swordsmanship, once seen as useless, would, when fused with magic, unleash such terrifying power. The evil spirit Duke, a terrifying monster usually found on the 25th floor, was cut in half by a single strike. Everyone was stunned. It was the first time they'd heard of the upper feather sword being combined like this. Not long ago, after encountering the evil spirit Duke again, everyone's first instinct was to run away. After all, surviving on the 11th floor with their current strength was already very difficult, let alone facing a monster that originally belonged to the 25th floor. Having just made a breakthrough in illusion magic, Green Hair volunteered to buy everyone some time to escape. However, he never expected that his attack, one that could instantly kill special monsters on the 11th floor, would be like paper in front of the evil spirit Duke, completely ineffective and unable to last even a second. Just as the evil spirit Duke's attack was about to land, luckily the main character arrived in time to save Green Hair from being killed on the spot. Fortunately, the attack also caused many weak stones to fall, blocking their line of sight and giving them a chance to catch their breath. They planned to use this opportunity to escape, but after running for a while, they realized it was impossible to retreat. Every nearby passage was guarded by evil spirit sentinels. The main character immediately recognized this as the evil spirit Duke's handiwork. Aimed at finding them, after all, the terrifying city they were in was supposed to be on the 25th floor, so such measures were not surprising. This completely cut off their escape routes. Though they had enough strength to take down the evil spirit sentinels, any noise would alert the evil spirit Duke, who could arrive in the blink of an eye. Just when everyone was starting to lose hope, the main character proposed a reckless plan to go on the offensive and defeat the evil spirit Duke. He had read in a book that the evil spirit Duke was very arrogant and never fought alongside his subordinates. If the commander was defeated, the soldiers would collapse, but to Blue Cat, This sounded like nonsense. He angrily scolded the main character and the female lead, insisting there was no way they could beat the evil spirit Duke. What Blue Cat didn't expect was that everyone else trusted the main character completely. Even more unbelievable was that the main character suddenly told Blue Cat that he was the key to defeating the evil spirit Duke. At first, Blue Cat was skeptical, but after hearing the main character's explanation, it wasn't long before they actively sought out the evil spirit Duke. Blue Cat was the first to step forward and began casting his eternal magic. As expected, in the next moment, he was hit by the evil spirit Duke's attack, but his chanting continued. That's because the one hit was only his clone. Why was he so confident? Because the main character had just told him about the hidden fate of the white art, the ability to continue spellcasting normally. If your chanting is interrupted, the magic can't be successfully cast. But the Ice Staff's technique was different. Even if one clone was destroyed, others could keep chanting. This meant that Blue Hair could cast high-level magic that required long chants, while the others provided cover during this time. Although their attacks barely scratched the evil spirit Duke, they succeeded in distracting him. With everyone's cooperation, Blue Hair finally finished charging his ultimate attack. To everyone's shock, even when hit by Blue Hair's big move, the evil spirit Duke remained unharmed. What they didn't know was that the main character had already accounted for this. After all, the evil spirit Duke was a monster worth 270 health bars. So it was time for Lyanna to step in. The idea was simple. Even if the evil spirit Duke could block Blue Hair's attack, his wings wouldn't avoid becoming Francine and brittle. Lyanna excitedly unleashed her skill, hoping to quickly finish off the evil spirit queen. However, despite all their plans, the main character hadn't accounted for one thing. Just before leaving, the headless man had cast a defense shield on the evil spirit Duke. Because of this, their plan completely failed. What made the main character regret even more was that Lyanna's final attack broke the protective goggles the Ice Staff had given him. This small oversight turned out to be a critical moment. Something inside the main character snapped, and his mind went completely blank. Although no one knew what was happening to him, Lyanna immediately decided to retreat again. Since the plan's key element was broken, it was up to him to buy time for their escape. What surprised everyone was that Green Hair insisted on going with him. No explanation was needed. It was clear there was a story between the two. Though they said it was to buy time, anyone could see this was a likely suicide mission, facing the evil spirit Duke. Yet they went without hesitation. Only Red Hair was torn inside. Running away felt like abandoning them, but staying meant risking their lives. Just as he was struggling, he suddenly heard the main character make a ridiculous request. Could he hit him? The reason was that his protective goggles from the Ice Staff were broken, and without them, he was too scared to fight properly. This absurd reason was the first time Red Hair had heard something like it, but they argued over it anyway. Red Hair agreed and punched him once. But it wasn't enough, so he hit him twice more. After an unknown number of punches, Red Hair stopped, but the main character suddenly changed. Red Hair couldn't react fast enough. Wasn't he scared before? So how had he suddenly changed into a different person and charged straight toward the evil spirit Duke? When Hong Mao asked about this, Crete explained that even now, the main character was still very afraid. The difference was that at a distance he could use magic, but close combat was a different story. One wrong move could be fatal. Meanwhile, the fight between the main character and the evil spirit Duke was about to begin. As Crete said, the main character was indeed very afraid of close combat, but because of his fear of death, he developed an extraordinary photographic memory. Though being hit once could mean death, relying on this skill, he could remember and counter the attacks. Just then, Red Hair seized an opportunity. Crete's words made him give up the idea of running, and instead chose to help the main character by attacking the evil spirit Duke up close to maximize damage. However, after Red Hair's advanced magic hit the evil spirit Duke up close, everyone was shocked again. The evil spirit Duke remained completely unharmed. The chance they had before wouldn't come again. The staff couldn't defeat him, nor could the sword. As despair crept in, suddenly an ice crystal appeared in front of the main character, triggering a memory in his mind. Since the staff and sword alone couldn't work, he combined the two. What the main character didn't know was that this was the ice staff's true form. He had actually arrived nearby earlier, and although the staff and sword hadn't merged yet, once he saw the ice crystal, the main character understood immediately. Like a revelation, he ordered Hong Mao to cast magic toward him, though Hong Mao didn't understand why. Hearing the main character's firm tone, he obeyed. In the next second, a miracle happened. The main character waved his sword, and the magic seemed to come alive, obediently wrapping around his blade. Everyone was stunned, not understanding what had happened, but the teacher watching through the crystal ball immediately recognized it as the legendary magic sword. This was the moment the main character's habits began to change. No one expected that the world's most mysterious and powerful staff, standing 5 stories tall, would suddenly appear in their moment of life and death. A monster they usually struggled to defeat could now be wiped out in one strike that covered an entire floor. This scene moved everyone. The magic staff was known as the world's most powerful mechanism. With its arrival, everyone felt at ease because the strongest mages were present. No matter how powerful they were normally, in the face of such beings, all must bow. While everyone focused on the magic staff, the main character's gaze was drawn to an ordinary-looking little boy who was also watching him. After a strange exchange, the boy asked the main character's name. Naturally, the main character didn't dare be rude and responded. Though they had no further contact afterward, the blonde boy deeply remembered him. Meanwhile, the two mysterious people the main character had met earlier were relieved to have arrived in time to retrieve their belongings. Avoiding conflict with the magic staff, the night of hell was about to begin. A day passed in a flash. The casualties among the combined families totaled 11, all teachers. Though the suspect was wanted based on witness testimony, no clues had been found. The main character and his group were resting in the hospital. Red Hair asked the question everyone was curious about: how did the main character defeat the evil spirit Duke? Unfortunately, even the main character didn't know. He only remembered his mind suddenly going blank before he instinctively used the move. Though strange, everyone had to accept this mystery. At that moment, the main character suddenly remembered one thing: who was the little boy next to the magic staff. Green Hair only had a limited understanding of the matter. He knew they belonged to the Light Clan. Though these little people couldn't use magic, they had accumulated generations of knowledge about dungeons. Long ago, they made a pact with the tower to help develop the dungeon. Without them, it was said no one could venture into the deeper levels. The little boy's record was said to have reached level 49. Meanwhile, the blonde-haired guy approached the principal, preparing to have him study a weapon. During the expedition, they had encountered a group of suspicious, mysterious figures. 20 high-level mages in their team had been killed. Because the enemy was so strong, they couldn't show mercy. No one was left alive except for this one weapon. Judging from their analysis, the weapon wasn't naturally generated in the dungeon. Instead, it was created by combining materials gathered from the deeper dungeon levels. After handing the weapon over to the principal, the real issue began. Suddenly, the blonde-haired guy questioned the principal about why he had never mentioned the main character before. He insisted that the matter should be their responsibility and the sword should be under the main character's care. The room fell silent for a moment. Fortunately, the principal had already prepared a response. He explained that the key was the main character wasn't just an ordinary swordsman. He was someone who aspired to the top and could only ascend the tower through magic. This explanation convinced the blonde-haired guy. After all, he had never heard of someone targeting the tower as a goal like this. Although it was clear the principal didn't intend to teach the main character, the blonde-haired guy was not willing to give up on such a prodigy. How could he just let him go? Meanwhile, the council hadn't come after him, and before he knew it, 2 months had passed. In the blink of an eye, it was time for the graduation exam. Whether one could enter the tower depended entirely on this final test.